Tejarah Talks.
Welcome to Tejarah Talks, Oman's premier business podcast. I am Faisal and Nabhani, your host for today. From green manufacturing to Gen Z and the creative industries, we explore the exciting trends and game-changing ideas that are shaping our business community. No matter whether you're a C-suite veteran, a startup pioneer, or a curious business enthusiast, we've got you covered. Today, we're joined by Taavi Einaste, CEO for Middle East and Africa, Nortal, and Haitham Busafi, CEO of Beyond XYZ. Let's start with Taavi. Please introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your role in the company and Nortal.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. So Nortal is originally from Estonia, and we have been very happy and lucky, I guess, to have been part of the Estonian digital transformation story for the last 23 years, making Estonia one of the most digital nations globally. Estonia is also a very small country, so from the early days when we wanted to grow our business, we had to be international, and we are currently present in over 26 offices globally. And I'm really happy to say that Oman was one of our first countries where we came 13, 14 years ago. So we've been part of the Omani digital transformation story for that time. Maybe some of our listeners would know the Invest Easy, so the Omani business registration case as one of the success stories. We can maybe talk about it a little bit more later. But my role is to oversee the business in the region. And we have a very strong local team here who I'm working with and here very often and have been coming to Oman for the last 14 years.
Thank you very much, Taavi. Over to you, Haitham.
Glad to be here. I'm Haitham, an architect by training. Been in the construction industry, media, design, and art for the past 12 years, currently operating a company in Saudi Arabia to do with the merger of the physical and the virtual using real-time technologies specifically catered for the film industry. So between Oman and Saudi and architecture and art.
Thanks for that, Haitham. And you're very humble in your response, I feel, because there's interesting aspects of your professional career that you haven't mentioned. You were guided at some point during your studies by acclaimed architects like Zaha Hadid, from what I understand. So, and obviously Zaha Hadid is one of the most famous architects of our time. She passed away, I think, 10 years ago or
2016.
2016.
Yes.
So just under 7 years ago. And you've also had a role in the inaugural National Pavilion of Oman at the Venice Biennale, which is a festival for arts and architecture, from what I understand.
Absolutely.
Over the past 10 years, Nortal has worked on some of Oman's most important digital transformation projects, including the Invest Easy portal and the Omani Census 2020. We've also been committed to developing local entrepreneurial talent through our Oman Talent Hub. With digital transformation playing a key role in Oman's Vision 2040, we're excited to see what's next for the country and how we can continue to be part of its journey.
In today's session, we're going to explore the role of cities, partnerships, how to attract talent, businesses, investments. If we can start by asking about the role of cities like Muscat, Sohar and Salalah, and Duqm. What are your thoughts on how we can turn our cities into business powerhouses? Let's start with you, Taavi.
Well, maybe I can. My first reaction always is when I'm talking about Oman and Muscat to my friends and other cities in Oman, is that not a lot of people know about what a wonderful place Oman is. So I think my first reaction would be that it's an uncovered gem. Such beautiful nature, very friendly people, excellent business climate, wonderful food. Sometimes too much for me, as you can see. But I think that one of the questions is how does the world get to know about Muscat and Oman more? Because to be honest, what I've seen just among my friends and colleagues who've traveled here, and it's I see it more and more happening on Instagram or Facebook. My friends, everybody's super excited. So I think that one of the first questions is how does the world get to know about Muscat and Oman and Shalala and the other cities? Because I think that there's a huge potential there.
Haitham, do you have what's your take on this?
I mean, if we look at, you mentioned a lot of cities that are kind of scattered across the country, each with its unique value, with its unique kind of planning and natural growth, to say. Some of it grew naturally, but some of it was actually designed, like Duqm, for example, from scratch as brand new cities. If we look at, for example, Muscat and how it grew, I think there was some sort of a natural growth at the beginning, where it kind of centered around culture, centered around history. I would say centered around history more and commerce. And then as the fast-paced development started, we kind of, to cope with that, to cope with attracting people moving from kind of the suburbs or other parts of Oman to the city itself, Muscat, we kind of lost it somehow, that we did not kind of create an urban fabric that pulls it together. To some extent, it still is there, this kind of scattered city. I think it needs a bit of work, which I think we will discuss throughout this session. But if we look at Sahar, for example, it's kind of around logistics and what it offers with the port, with the density of people all around it, and the areas that is pulling there, the history of Nizwa, and the nature and tourism that is around it, Jabal Akhdar, etc. And then if we go to Salala, kind of very unique with a port and the kind of unique weather that it has. It attracts a lot of tourists from across the world. So all of these cities are quite distinct in their own nature. And I think each is needs a bit of work to make it, and to complement what Taavi said, is kind of just to attract people to them by having a clear, I would say, uniqueness to them developed furthermore.
Right.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I think historically, and you probably can maybe come back on this as well. I think what has been interesting is that a lot of interesting developments globally have always happened in a kind of feedback loop. So, when the Dutch invented modern banking, I think it's not an accident that at the same time we have all these, grandmasters of painting happening at the same time, because you had a lot of people with a lot of money on their hands and they needed to do something with it. So, they had the opportunity to hire painters, a lot of painters, and, everybody wanted to be better. Same happened in Italy. So if we look at the historical, let's say, cultural achievements, then it somehow always has happened at the same time when the economy has been booming.
So there's a correlation.
I think there's a correlation. There's a feedback loop. One is feeding the other, because obviously the same artists, they also bring ideas, and not only artists but scientists, whoever is around, writers, and I think. Historically, those feedback loops have been relatively slow, looking at how fast the world is moving today. And maybe the challenge for us here is that if you look at the development of Oman in the last 50 years, 60 years, and we know more or less from the scientists what the demographics look like. So the country is almost doubling in the next 20 years. So the pace of development is much faster today. So I think that one of the questions is, in the same feedback loop, like what kind of catalysts can the society, perhaps the public sector, throw into the mix to kind of support this feedback loop? Because there's a lot of economic development happening, clearly. There will be more people around. So what are the missing ingredients or like what can we add so that you can get the same type of feedback loop and also like develop great things, not only economically but culturally, perhaps scientifically. And I think that's an interesting challenge.
I think it's a great question, and maybe it's something we can also tackle now. In your assessments, you've been in the region for a while, right? What do you feel? What kind of things can catalyze further development? What kind of initiatives or projects or programs can help to attract talent, for example? What would you say?
Well, a little bit basing on what we've heard before, but I think one of the missing things globally today is originality. I think that I always like to quote my wife as well. So she's saying that especially in Europe, if you would be taken by a bus or a plane to a city not knowing which one it is, and you put down in the center, you might not necessarily recognize, because everything is becoming more similar.
Right.
And I think that this originality is something that Oman has. And I think that increasingly people are finding this. So I think that you have a great base, to attracting the next 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 people here, the top talent, because the top talent is always looking for something original. So I think this is the base. Now the question is like how do you layer on top of this? Like I think in city developments we have always seen that when there's a district of artists, techno clubs. Studios, then it takes 10, 15 years, 20 years when the bankers and the IT guys show up, because they also want to be cool.
Sure.
And I think that the question here is, and I don't have the answer. I think that's the interesting part of it. How do you capitalize? How do you take this really deep historic culture that Oman has, which is original, which is interesting to the world, right, and build on top of this? And I think it's not a trivial question, and I'm not claiming to have the answer, but I think that there's a great base here.
Agreed. It is a fascinating question.
I think just to build on that, I look at a city is basically a framing of society and the structure of that society. And the uniqueness that our cities in Oman is basically based on the people and kind of our own society, the way we live, the way we treat each other, the way we kind of work and do business together. And from that, it's not about importing things on this society and imposing it on the society, but taking these key ingredients and key kind of uniqueness and pushing it forward, developing it further. That could be kind of a way to attract people by capitalizing on the idea of the uniqueness. Another idea, I think, in terms of city development, in terms of city planning, I think the world is currently at a stage where it tries to build cities that are tailored for the gig economy, fourth industrial revolution. People are not working 9-to-5 jobs. They're more collaborating together. They're working at different times of the day. And to capitalize or to build a city that tailors or works for these kind of demands and working environments is what cities are going for. And I think we have not seen that here yet, because that needs a level of density, a level of complexity in the city itself, the multi-layeredness of the city, the idea of having a mixed use of different functions where people come together. I don't have to commute from one edge to another edge to go to work and then commute back, and then I have another meeting, I have to commute again. This idea of enhancing density that is conducive to collaboration, conducive to a youth culture that works nicely together and collaborates together, and right, in informal kind of meetings and encounters that happen within this.
Right. Sustainability. How can we ensure that the elements, the original elements you mentioned in Omani heritage, architecture, culture, how can that contribute to sustainability?
One of the, I think, elements which is coming back now is the famous, 15-minute city, which I think, if you look at the old towns, the historical old towns of Omani cities, it's quite dense. So people used to live close to each other, and I think think that's one of the ways of the future as well. Like if we all have huge yards, with houses far from each other, it means a lot of driving. So, maybe that's one of the ways how to go back to the, let's say, original way of living. So we probably have to live closer together.
Closer together.
Yes.
Despite the fact that we have huge uninhabited land.
Absolutely. Exactly. And perhaps the unused inhabited land has a different purpose. So this is the area of, like, let's say, recreation. Sustainability, keeping it for the future generations, but also recreation. So, this is where we go perhaps during the weekend.
And renewable energy as well.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Haitham, your take on this?
I would agree that the way we used to live is quite very sustainable. It's basically density, it's mixed use, things are coming together. Everything is walkable. I think 15-minute city, there is 10-minute city, and then people are working on 5-minute cities these days. Just this idea of proximity and density, I think is quite important. The idea of uninhabited land I think is quite interesting as well. We import a lot of almost everything in Oman when it comes to agriculture and produce, etc. So I think this idea of uninhabited land could cater itself for kind of we could really not depend on importing as much, but we could develop things within.
I mean, we are a net food importer, but we also produce a lot in Oman as well.
Nice.
And the unused land obviously also require water, and a lot of it, to be able to get to that level of food security. But I take your point on the uninhabited land and how one can also use it for things like food security, renewable energy, and other things.
But I think one of the, let's say, ways how specifically like cities, can be more sustainable. Of course, it depends a lot on the, let's say, carbon neutrality of energy. So how energy is produced and consumed. But what we see globally is a lot of advancement in so-called closed box farming or like kind of industrial farming in the positive sense of the world, meaning storaged farms, like they can be in city centers, which are much more energy efficient in the end than having an open field somewhere, and you can do it in a sustainable way, assuming that you're able to also use, let's say, for example,
this is vertical farming. Are we talking
vertical farming? Yes.
But then this is something also I wanted to. It wasn't clear to me why. I mean, I understand the appeal of vertical farming in densely populated urban cities where land is scarce, but in a country like Oman as well.
Sure, but it's also not only about the land use, but it's also the energy use, because you're able to really control the climate in a very specific way, which is very positive for the yields. So you will grow more with less, so to say, and with smart farming, you're also able to control the nutrients. So you have a precision agriculture, if I may say so. So the vertical is only part of it, but it's more about. With the tools we have today, you are able to be more ecologically friendly, if I may say so, because you'll be really able to control what goes in, what goes out, also in terms of pollution. So I think that there are ways how to, let's say, support those kind of dense communities without having to, drive everything in from 1,000 miles away, or
so
even.
there is definitely a case to be made for vertical farming then in Oman. It's interesting that these conversations are really interesting, because if you would ask the ordinary person, they would say, why should we be densely populated in a smaller area? I mean, we've got this huge land, we've got. And as you said, Omanis also, they like their privacy, So why sort of, be in dense areas if we have all of this land? And the case that you're making, from what I understand, is that because it's good for business, right? It's good for economic development. And there are examples and success stories of densely populated cities that are hugely successful. And perhaps one of the reasons for their success is the fact that they are close to each other. They live close to each other, and you can have these meetings that you mentioned in a short space of time. You don't have to wait long periods to go from this part of the city to the other part of the city. So, would you agree with that?
Definitely, and maybe I would draw perhaps an unexpected parallel here. From my first visits to Oman, I've always kind of tried to understand also like what are the differences and what are the similarities with Estonia. So they seem a world apart, right? Very, very kind of different cultural backgrounds, very different histories in some ways, but at the same time, an amazing number of similarities. We've both gone through an amazing development in a very short period of time recently. So we're both very dynamic nations. We achieved a lot. We're also, even though it sounds unexpected, but Estonia is the size of Denmark. But the population is 1.4 million people. So we do have a lot of land also in Estonia. It's a very empty country. At the same time, Tallinn, which is the capital city, some would say the startup capital of the world, is building a lot into heights. So it's becoming more dense as a city. So the population is increasing. And I think having also lived globally in different bigger cities, I think that one of the things that makes it easier to deal with this density is the ability to go away. And as far as I know from my Omani friends, which is very similar to Estonia, on the weekends we very often go to our hometown, home village.
That's right.
To our farm.
That's right.
And we take the time off, and then we're back again on Sunday morning, ready for the hustle of the big city.
That's absolutely correct. And this is one of the aspects that is quite original to Oman and perhaps also other countries as well, and perhaps could also reflect how cities should also be designed in the future to take into account this specific aspect. Haitham, I'd like to hear from you, in your opinion, what are the 4 or 5 factors that make a city not just attractive, but advantageous for business? And I'd like to hear from you as well, Taavi, but maybe first from Haitham. And how can Omani cities tap into these 4 or 5 factors?
I would say density, connectedness, mixed use, or in a way complexity and multi-layeredness. As well, different culture, I think, is quite important, culture and history. And these would come to mind at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Taavi?
Well, I'll mention something which I think is globally true, that magic happens when talent meets capital, talent meets money, or another way of saying this is ambition or creativity meets greed. Let's say the negative side of capitalism. So I think that cities also need to provide this access to both, right? So you need to have access to capital if you have ideas. In most of the world, there's a lack of ideas, not of money. And I think that one of the eternal problems, which has been around forever and probably will continue to be around forever, is how do you connect the young creative minds with some money in the beginning so that they can test out their ideas. And it's always a question of trust and where do they meet, because these are quite different universes very often. The university students with crazy ideas and the old bankers. So it's not always a logical combination. Mm-hmm. And I think when you say density and connectivity, that's probably one of the questions, like where do they meet? Like, is it at the is it at the university cafes? Is it
who are you referring to by they? Who do you mean by they?
Okay, so let's say if you want to have kind of the young creative minds, be it artists or software developers, game developers, film producers, writers, whoever, they are always lacking capital to develop their ideas. So how do the people with the ideas meet with the people with money,
right?
And like, how does this synergy happen? Where do they? What's the logical place in Muscat for them to meet? And I think that's something where also events like Tejarah Talks are like really wonderful because as we saw yesterday at the event, it's a very diverse crowd. So you have students and you have business executives, and they do mingle after the event. So I think providing these types of places and events, both physically and digitally, for ideas and money to meet, that's an important element of how a city becomes a powerhouse.
Definitely. And I'm glad you mentioned digitally, because the next question is on digital transformation. In the age that we're witnessing right now, the age of digital transformation, I mean, if you were to gauge the average screen time in Oman and across the world, I think we will find worrying numbers in terms of our life is increasingly becoming more in the digital space. So it makes it all the more important that we have a robust digital infrastructure in place. So what do you think in terms of Omani cities incorporating technology and digital infrastructure? How can we optimize urban services? How can these technologies optimize urban services in Omani cities?
I would maybe, if we talk about like urban environments or even let's say country level environments and the digital infrastructure, my own or let's say our own thinking has more evolved into the direction of it's a little bit controversial perhaps, the best service is no service. So I think one of the promises of the digital transformation, the revolution that's happening, and I'm sorry to say the buzzword AI, is the fact that we are able to get rid of a lot of services as we know them. Because if you look at the historical relationship between a person or a business and the government, it has been about like taxation and protection, and then later about social welfare, and then permits. So there's always some kind of a transactional relationship. I want something, I will ask for it, government will provide it. And that's takes effort from both sides. I think that a lot of those interactions can be made automatic so that they kind of disappear from our lives. In the opposite direction, I think that becoming more digital sometimes can mean less digital. So that instead of me, in the old times I would go to a government office and fill out the paper. In the modern times I do it online. But what we think, a lot of those services should disappear, because the interaction between the person and or a business and the government in many cases can be automated, so that instead of actually spending this screen time, I'm able to kind of just do whatever I want to do. None of us want to spend time interacting with the government. If we are a small business or a big business, we want to do the business. We want to meet partners. We want to be productive. And I think that if we are able to kind of get away from those interactions, then we will actually give back the time that we want to spend talking to our friends or business partners or families. And I think that's the ideal, let's say, target state for myself. And it's of course a journey.
Right. More efficient allocation of time is what
Absolutely.
you're arguing. Time is increasingly becoming more and more scarce.
Yeah.
So the more we're able to devote time for increasing productivity, for things that generate wealth, I think the argument is that digital infrastructure helps a lot in that area.
Absolutely. But not only, I think generating wealth and being efficient is perhaps the prerequisite also for the, let's say, the more human side. Because let's say also as a parent, as a husband, of course, I want to be successful in my work and hopefully, make a lot of money and all of those things. But let's say instead of, driving to a government office or even, spending 45 minutes in some kind of an online process for something for my business or myself, I'm happier taking my daughters to to an art exhibition or just walking in the park,
right,
which
increases your well-being.
Absolutely. and you know, also the kind of the connection between me and my family or my friends. And I think that, you know, taking this time back for us as humans, I think yesterday at the Tejarah Talks, there was a notion which I hadn't heard before, that people don't want to have livable cities, they want to have was it lovable cities?
Lovable cities.
Lovable cities. And I think that, you know, that's kind of the definition of a lovable city.
What went on yesterday on the
Absolutely. So I think that, you know, a lovable city or a lovable environment for me is where I'm able to you know, be successful professionally, fulfill my promise, use my talent, but also have enough time and resources to, you know, provide for my family, spend time with them, you know, hang out with friends. So I think you have to find that balance.
Completely agree. Haitham, what's your take on this? How can the digital infrastructure help in giving you more time as somebody who's working for a virtual reality, correct? Virtual reality company. How can digital infrastructure help you?
I think there's a lot of push for smart cities, kind of this buzzword again. But I think you cannot build a smart city on a stupid city. Maybe that's not the right word, but if the city itself, the actual physical aspect of it is not conducive for connection and kind of bringing people together, then having that layer on top of it to optimize it more would not do the job. So I think we should start with a base that is a bit more kind of refined and pulled together. Later on, these technologies that the best technology is when it really disappears and I really don't need it. I don't need to interface with it.
Right.
So this is kind of what I want to get to, is that we should pull our cities together to be more human and to avoid technology as it's kind of for technology to disappear. And I think with a lot of kind of these technologies that are coming, AI, data and stuff, we are on that path to get a city that is a bit more human, lovable and livable.
There's two main things in the intervention that you just made. Firstly, from what I understood, you're saying that for cities to become smart, it's not enough to have surgical interventions, as in bringing some systems here and there, optimizing some areas, but rather it has to be organic. This is from. So then I guess the question that follows up from that is, how can cities have an organic strategy for digitalizing the processes, for facilitating people's lives, and bearing in mind and taking into account that the humanness, as it were, of the city should not be compromised? How do you do that?
Well, I think that there's an inherent, let's say, conflict in making this happen between the efficiency, the invisibility of technology, the automation, and data privacy. So let's say, by definition, if we want the city government, or even various private businesses kind of serving the community to be more efficient, to offer us better service, sometimes invisible service, so that we don't have to ask for it. It comes to us when needed. That by definition means that whoever is offering that service, they need to have access to a lot of data for us. And we've done a lot of research on this, and I think it's one of those things where you don't have to do research, but it's a common sense. Obviously, people have somewhat different attitudes to data privacy. Some are very happy sharing the data and also kind of receiving a lot of personalized service in return. Others are perhaps more cautious, and I think that many cities or governments today would be able to offer a lot more of invisible, personalized services. The technology is there, so the somewhat unanswered question is like, how do we deal with different levels of data privacy of people? So people just have different preferences.
Right, and you need laws, and in Oman we have data privacy laws.
Absolutely.
For that.
And I think if you look at the Omani law, or let's say EU GDPR, so in theory it gives a lot of power to the person, but I think the challenge is that historically the data points that were connected were few. Age, or let's say date of birth, family, business, etc. But the number of data points in a modern city is increasing exponentially, and I think that it's not a realistic expectation for the regulator, let's say, to expect that the average person is able to kind of knowingly control how their data is used, because there's just so much data.
Right.
And I think that the whoever is able to be most efficient about giving people both the invisible efficient services, but also the comfort of data privacy or data protection, and that's the winning combination.
That's the as you can say, the correct balance to strike, and it's easier said than done.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Gen Z, their expectations in modern cities. How can you ensure that cities respond to Gen Z's requirements? And if we can also talk a little bit about digital nomads. Haitham.
I think this discussion of digital nomads is quite interesting. Last weekend, a friend of mine was visiting from Netherlands, and he's like only spending 1 day here, 2 days actually. Went from Muscat to Jabal Akhdar and back the next day. And he was like, where can I spend 3 months and work in Oman? Because he loved it. This just 2 hours from the city to Jabal Akhdar, and the nature you get in touch with is quite interesting. So if we look at Oman and most of its kind of cities, they're quite in good proximity to each other, I would say. So Sahar, Muscat, and Nizwa, for example, Sur, maybe on the seaside. These are all very connected, 2 hours away apart, which is quite interesting. If I'm a digital nomad moving from one to the other, it's I would do it,
Mm-hmm.
It's just about the facilities, the kind of having urban centers that pull things together, whether it's in Sahar or Muscat or even Jabal and Nizwa. So just a dense, small urban center, I think, would do the job, kind of not mainly a downtown feel, maybe that is kind of for Muscat, but in these areas, putting people together, especially that the population isn't of, the growth is not that fast. So I think the digital, attracting digital nomads from around the globe, we definitely, as Oman, should kind of approach that market. And as well, it links to the Gen Zs and the way they would love to live within the country. So, I mean, you go to coffee shops, they're full of the youngsters working, talking to each other and collaborating with each other. So this idea of co-working spaces that are now popping up everywhere, it's only discrete kind of coffee shops and co-working spaces that are scattered around. I think we need to pull them together a little bit, and having a smart transportation system could do this idea of connectedness. You don't have to spend hours on the road, although it's not a lot of traffic at the moment, which is nice. But then you don't have to get into a car. Why do I need to get into a car if I have public transport that would take me from A to B while I'm chatting with my friends and I'm having a good time with my friends?
Right. Taavi?
Well, I think my first reaction would be that I probably don't know what the Gen Z wants. That's the honest reflection. But a couple of maybe kind of experiences. So for example, of course, COVID changed a lot of things. And what we found is that, of course, we have a lot of people who did not like working from home, so they missed the office environment, and for some people it was tough for their mental health as well. Being alone, still having to perform. At the same time, we found that there's a section of people who really liked it and they don't want to come back. And we have a so-called work from anywhere program at Nortal, which has been actually quite popular. And I think it's interesting, perhaps this, 3 or 4 months is a good starting point. So what we offer is if a person can agree with their team that it's okay for them to work from wherever they want to, they can. So we provide them with the tools, the data security tools, so they can be in Bali or Muscat or in Portugal somewhere. And I think that this demand is really there, definitely. I think that the next question is like, how easy is it for somebody to be here for, let's say, 3 or 4 months? How do you find an apartment or a hotel room for that long? So not maybe the regular hotel room price. So I definitely think that there's an opportunity. I mean, it's a beautiful nature here, excellent food, nice people. So the potential is here, and I think that definitely can be tapped into. And I think it's also, Oman has a lot of young people coming out from university. So there's a huge amount of young talent. And I think it's very beneficial for them to have, again, those interactions, like we talked before, the talent meeting the money, but having the young Omani graduates or students, the opportunity in the local coffee shop, not having to travel to, London or Paris or New York, but having those interactions here, in your hometown, perhaps. And I think that's really would be a beautiful experience.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, with this, we really coming to the end of our Tejarah Talks session. Are there any final remarks you'd like to make before we wrap up?
I think, let's say, first of all, from my side, thank you for this opportunity. I think it's always really wonderful to exchange these ideas. And I think, the more I think about it, of course, I'm here very often and having conversations with people, but I'm just, very convinced about the future that Oman has. So I'm excited to be a part of it, excited to see what's next.
Thank you. How about you, Haitham?
Coming from a creative side, I was amazed how AI took over kind of being creative super fast. It would be interesting to look at cities in the advent of AI and AI taking a lot of jobs away, how cities would give us more time for ourselves, our families, being with nature. So I think that is a question to the listeners out there.
Haitham and Taavi, thank you very much for joining the podcast.
Thank you. Shukran.
Well, that wraps up another episode of Tejarah Talks, where we explored the role of cities in business. Thanks for joining us. Please don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. I am Faisal Nabhani. Join us again the next time.
Tejarah Talks.